Hey everybody, this is Paddy from Odds on FPL with a video that I think you'll find quite interesting. I think many people in fantasy football struggle with the idea of captaincy, and it's one of the most difficult things to get right in terms of fantasy football. We all have different methods, some matter than others, but I feel that there's no better people to ask about captaincy than people who've won fantasy football. So that's what I did. I reached out to the 5 most recent champions and found their methods of choosing captains in the hope of finding some correlation as to what made them winners and what can potentially make us winners going forward. This video should hopefully help you with your captaincy decisions going forward. But first off, I'm just going to rehearse one thing. So many people aren't subscribed. You can get great content such as this, and all you have to do is click that subscribe button and you'll start getting it. First up, there's Ben Crabtree, who won fantasy football in 2017. He said that he generally looks at big hitters and see who has the best fixture out of them. The best fixture for him would give a preference to being at home, and then he would look at defensive form as well as the overall perception of the team's placement in the league. Occasionally, when all big hitters have tough fixtures, I like to take a chance on a lesser owned player, again giving preference to their fixture, but also taking into account current form. In this sort of scenario, I asked Ben then, hypothetically, let's say if Salah, Kane and Kevin De Bruyne or Bruno Fernandes all were playing up against opposition of similar calibre and they were all in similar form, all at home, how would he make the decision then? Ben said, the form of the player, partly by actual output, which would mean goals, assists, points, and partly by sharpness, speed of getting shots off, apparent confidence level. This is subjective, but it is something which I believe people can make a judgment on themselves. It wouldn't necessarily be thought of in a list like that, but more of a gut instinct based on what I'd seen of them recently. As you can see, they're subjective. Hopefully you can see this decision's worked for him because he's won it. Next up is Yusuf Sheik, who won it in 2018. I asked Yusuf the same question about how he chooses his captain. He said, it's usually form and fixtures for me, but I mostly and usually go for a midfielder as a captain. Once in a while, when I feel there's an opportunity to climb the ranks, I take a risk and go for a differential pick. I asked Yusuf then, what does he consider a differential pick? He said, a differential pick for me is when it's in a week where most will go for the expected choices like Salah, Bruno or other high ownership players. In a situation like that, I'd maybe go for a player like Son or Mahrez. He said it's a risk. This could work in his favour or against him. So essentially it's a gamble, but he doesn't mind taking risks. I also asked Yusuf the same question as I asked Ben. In a hypothetical situation, who would he choose? Like, as in, if all players had similar difficulty. He said, if in a game week where 3 top players were all facing similar quality weaker opposition, and were at home, then I'm a big fan of choosing Salah. In fact, in the final game week of the season, which I won FPL, I triple captained Salah, so I'm always likely to go for Salah. I've always been hesitant with Kane in previous seasons, and also when captaining strikers. So that's an interesting decision, as in, when you're choosing a big hitter, there are players who are better point scorers, as in Salah's proven it now a couple of seasons how good he is. So that's something to consider. As in, I don't think in a statement like that he's saying that he's going to overthink it, but if you are in a position where you can't really choose, it's always good to have a fallback option, and Salah is a great fallback option. Next up was the 2019 winner, which was Adam Levy. Adam doesn't have an online presence on Twitter, so I had to go searching for any sort of resource which said how he chooses captains. He said, the first time I would look at my team for the new game week, I would click on the instinctive captain that I felt right. I would try not to even think about it. That looks like the player with the best fixture, click and do not change. There was one time I brought in Higuain and I captained him. Remember Higuain at Chelsea, it was not good. Every other game week I went, that's it, click, and didn't touch it again. I got this from the Premier League website where he was quoted saying this. Overall, that seems like a great mentality to have. It makes it a lot easier, not overthinking it, and generally it's just quite helpful for that. Next up was the 2020 winner. This was Joshua Bull. Joshua Bull's a mathematician and he's a very smart bloke. I asked him as well about captaincy, and he said, to be honest, captaincy decision for me is probably the most straightforward pick. I do usually look at predicted point values, say FPL review, or odds on FPL back in the day, you know, when we used to do that. And he tends to end up with whoever's highest in his team. But the decision normally looks like this. So this is a process. Who do I have that has a high ceiling? Essentially, a player who has a lot of value in him. More expensive players. Somebody like Kevin De Bruyne, Salah, Bruno, Mane, so anybody who's high cost. Maybe even Jamie Vardy. And the next question he'd ask himself, which of them has the easiest fixture? Most of the time that meshes up with being the player in my team who's predicted the most points via stats anyway, so I try not to overthink it. So essentially it's another person who's saying don't overthink it, just look at the fixture, look at the form, who's the most expensive player in your team, that's the best decision. Generally players who are more expensive have a higher ceiling, and generally they're more consistent. You have players like Mahrez who have a high ceiling but they're very inconsistent. In this scenario he's probably going to be saying somebody like Salah, Kane, KDB, somebody like that. I then asked Joshua the same question as I've asked the other players. What would you do in a scenario where players have very similar fixture? It's hard to choose between them. He said, when it's close enough to be a coin toss, I'll generally go with whoever has the higher X points. That would be on FPL review. And then he says, although sometimes I just like to go with my gut. So that just shows that it's really hard to find a formula for it. As in, it's about how you feel, but generally choose an expensive player. Next up is Michael Coone, who is the most recent winner. He's Irish as well. I asked him the same question about choosing captaincy, and he said to me, there isn't an exact science, I'm afraid. I generally went safe last year and rotated between premiums. Again, somebody choosing the expensive players. He said, Salah, Kane, Bruno generally target fixtures and form. That's my way, not overthinking the decision, and I take as little risks as possible. You certainly won't always get the captaincy decision right, which is very true. Some people overthink it, and then you can even look at previous game weeks where players like Salah has outperformed Bruno, and you're just left like, oh, why didn't I choose the other one? It's fine margins, it's really variance. It's quite a contrast here between Michael and Yusuf, where Michael doesn't particularly like taking risks, and he's the more recent winner. I think he's also the most points ever in fantasy football, so that's really interesting. And then Yusuf and also Ben don't mind with differential picks. It's just quite interesting, I think. I asked Michael the similar question as well, and he said when there are three players essentially who he wants to pick, they've all got easy fixtures. He said it's generally instinct, so it's good again. It would be rare that they all have easy fixtures and they are all in form going into it. Then you look at each of their teams, how important the game is to them, and the rest of the team is full strength. That's something that I guess is considered by other people as well when you're thinking about the fixture. And then he says it comes down to the opposition at the time, who looks worse concedes the most. Close decisions like that are important, but you're not always going to get them right. Again, reaffirming the idea of overthinking it can be somewhat pointless. So then to conclude, here's a bunch of takeaways that I have. Essentially, pick big hitters, expensive players. They're more consistent. Choose the best fixture. So essentially that's looking at the fixtures. Form is also important, so don't choose a side who are definitely a better team but are out of form. That's something definitely to consider. Give preference to a home fixture. Like if, let's say, Man United are playing away but they're against a weaker side, but Man City are at home, you have to consider that. Don't overthink it. Use your gut. Move off big hitters in tougher fixtures. That's an interesting one there as well, moving off big hitters in tougher fixtures. So essentially, don't choose Salah against somebody like Chelsea. Just something to consider. There's better options elsewhere. So yep, anyway, that has been the video. Hopefully you found this interesting. I have anyway. I've certainly found it interesting to talk to previous winners and see their experience with captaincy. I find captaincy to be something that everybody has different opinions on, and it's quite interesting to see the differences between all the previous winners, yet there are similarities as well. Hopefully you found this interesting. If you did, please like, subscribe the video, or subscribe to the channel. And I've been Paddy. Talk to you soon.